questions before we start? Start in about a minute or so. So download your assignments and your notes and also your lab for today. You are going to need a drive for your lab. And we're going to talk about risk today. Hi. What's up? Okay, so if you're interested in becoming a tutor, right, apply and I can recommend you. But anyway, let's talk about risk management. This is a very important area because I think most of us in cybersecurity, we have to look at risk and be able to interpret how that risk would either benefit or have disadvantage with the company. So to really define risk is a likelihood that a threat will exploit the vulnerability. Attackers are always going to look for vulnerability and exploit the vulnerability, and an attacker is a threat. So we can look at positive and negative risk. To define the other two, vulnerability is just a flaw or a weakness in a system or a software. So a system can be inherently designed with a flaw. And when you're looking at services like web would have vulnerability, or even communication across the system would have vulnerability. A threat is anything that can cause danger or damage to your system, like malware, attacker. It could be insider threats like human, right? And then the impact is just the level or the magnitude of harm. So in risk management, you have to either qualify the risk in different levels, or you can quantify the risk in numerical values or in points or in ranking. So let's go through some of the questions together. We explained the differences between risk, threats, and vulnerability. So risk is the likelihood that a threat will exploit the vulnerability. The vulnerability is the weakness in the system or software. And so when we talk about services that rely on a lot of software, right? Like if we're talking about web services, we might run web server that would on Windows side that is IIS, and on the Linux side you would see that as Apache or NGINX, which is capitalized on Apache. So any software or hardware design could have a flaw from day one, right? Or day zero, they should say. And so your threat could be internal or external. So the internal threats, sometimes we would say that as insider threat. That could be the people within the company that could leak data or cause damage. And that could be physical damage or logical damage. And some threat we would see that is external, like an attacker coming in from the outside, or malware that's being brought into the company via USB or downloads or malicious links. So how do we determine the levels of security impact? We said that the impact is really the magnitude, right, of the damage. So we can qualify the security impact. So it can be qualified or quantified based on the magnitude of harm that can be caused. If the threat exercises the vulnerability, that means that if the threat exploits the vulnerability. So malware is really designed to exploit the vulnerability of the system, like your operating system or your applications. That's on the software side. Malware could also be causing damage to your memory, RAM, right? Depends on the type of malware. So in the industry, they would have score ranking, and that would be considered quantification of your impact. And then we would have levels like low, medium, or high, or critical, highly critical, low, right? So that would be qualification of the impact. So for Security Plus and our final exam, you just need to know the differences between risk, vulnerability, and threat. Hello. Making sure we understand the differences by definition and also provide example. You might get asked these questions on interviews, right? Like they would ask you to provide an example of a risk in a network or in a system. Hello. So, hi. So a malicious human threat, that could be an attacker. It could be a cyber criminal. It could be script kiddies. These are the people who potentially could be red hat, but they are on their way there, right? They would use pre-made tools or exchange tools. And sometimes the consequences are not known. So for them, they would take higher risk to perform a certain type of malicious actions. And then the internal threats, the human threats, you would see disgruntled employees, people that get raised, or they're upset, or they disagree with internal practices somehow. And then you have organized crime groups. And previously we talked about APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. So some of the accidental things that can happen, especially with the insider threats, and I think I spent a little bit of this on the ethical hacking sessions with the students in that class. Sometimes people delete files by accident. Sometimes they send out sensitive information via email by accident. Those are accidental human threats. Now, on the email side, we can do a lot to control that, right? We can do content approval, meaning that if they're sending an attachment or any kind of sensitive information in the body of the email, like social security number, health information, any kind of personal identifiable information, you can specify the rules in your email server to make sure that it controls, right, the outbound mail before it can actually go out. It would then need approval from a supervisor or somebody in the IT management area for security. So we can control some of that. But importantly, I think we need to make sure that people are aware and they actually have security practices. So with that, you have to regularly train the people. And then implement the policies or the rules to make sure that they understand the consequences, but accidental things, right? Disclosure, personal identifiable information, sometime on message or even over phone calls. A lot of companies implemented practices for disposing documents, like paper documents. In California, a lot of the things that we do legally require wet signing. That means that a person has to pick up a pen and sign like contractual services, especially for legal requirements. For example, if you're purchasing a home, right? There are processes in getting your loans approval online. And then, you know, throughout that process, there will be one time that you are going to have to do a wet sign and you have to get it notarized and so on. It also depends on the local government and state government. So with that, you would see a lot of paper documents are still being used. If you go to the medical office, they still require that you fill out most of the time paperwork, right? For some offices that are more advanced, they will implement more digital where they give you a tablet and you type in all the information, but you still have to wet sign some of the things to accept their service and then the liability for the treatment and so on. So disposing documents, we have to make sure that people are shredding documents accordingly. They can acquire the service. But for personal practices, we need to make sure that your sensitive information just doesn't go into the trash. Why? You guys hear of dumpster diving, right? Where people go into the dumpster, they would pull out information. Even the shredded documents sometimes can be piece together. And then making sure that we have practices with login, cannot leave unattended login or desktop access without logging in, and then files being open. Any question? So with that, what we would see is there are some other type of threats, like environmental threats or man-made threats. Physical harm to your technical environment and your assets, your people. So environmental assessment would evaluate the likelihood that natural disaster or man-made disaster occurring. Things like fire, storms, earthquakes, right? Those are natural disasters. And then also man-made, sometimes that can also be fire because sometimes that can be caused by an individual. But wildfire, that cannot be stopped, right? Especially for our area, we would be concerned more with wildfire because of the heat and the dry seasons. And then you have man-made, like bombing, right? Cutting cables, pulling power, because without power, we have no systems. Without systems, we have no service. So imagine, right, we have no power in the whole city. You would then have no gas. There might be backup generator for a short period of time. There might not be able to have, we might not have transactional system if there's no power. So we rely on electricity heavily. So with that, we have to consider the importance of utility and the protection of utility systems in our local area and overall in our country. So you're looking at not just logical protection where we would prevent attacks and things from causing damages to the logical system or, you know, the actual computer. But then we have to also think about your physical environment. So an example of this is we have to take a look at in California for California fire in the region for the business operation. And that can be different if you're in a different state or in a different area, right? We would consider tornadoes or earthquake. Man-made assessment evaluates the likelihood the human threat accidentally or maliciously impact the organization, right? Like I said, sometimes people can cause damage to the building or inside the building. You see a lot of this, right? Now, a lot of the physical element, so if we're thinking about data center, that's where all our servers are housed, right? Our network is there, the equipment is there. We have to have fire extinguisher because that, you know, fire could break out. But a lot of times we rely on either water-based extinguisher or gas-based extinguisher, right? And we have to really consider two areas. Is it human-friendly or is it system-friendly? If it's human-friendly, it might not be system-friendly. So if you're using water, it's definitely human-friendly. That means that, you know, there's no skin damage when the water comes down. However, that might not be system-friendly, right? Halon, I think now they stopped selling Halon system, but that would be a way to use gas to suppress fire. And then if you're looking at regular fire extinguisher, right? If you use extinguisher, you have to really consider, right? You have to weigh the risk. If I use this, I would suppress fire. It would stop from spreading, but then, you know, how is that going to impact my system? And if my system is fully corrupted, but the human assets is still there, right? What is the cost behind rebuilding that system and the data in the system, right? But ultimately, we value human life above everything else. So when we assess for security, we have to make sure that it's human friendly first, and then we would look at the content for the data and the system.
Stacy?
Yeah.
Where is number 5 on the notes?
For environmental, Hold on, let me find it. I thought I put that down. Give me 1 second. I think I've gone down too far. There's internal threats, intellectual, malicious. Maybe I didn't include it on the actual document. I thought I did before. It's just, yeah, yeah, it's just underneath that, but it doesn't go into details like that. It's only like that one line. On page 1, under threat assessment. But you have to critically think how that can be impacting, right, for the area. So you have to look at the region, the requirements for the region. For us, that will be earthquake and fire. Okay, the example of vulnerability. So anytime that you see vulnerability, you would think of flaws or the lack of. So if I don't have firewall configuration, that would be considered a vulnerability. So without firewall, we cannot block certain type of traffic. For example, if you're being attacked, the firewall is going to help you filter some of that attack traffic. So the firewall rules can be set. The firewalls also is going to allow us to look at what is allowed on the network. So it is a way to filter out the things that we want and block the things that we don't want. The lack of updates is another example, right? Update to your software, updates to your OS, update to your system, update to your firmware. So updates is important because updates is going to close out some security issues, especially for operating system. So we have to know some of the vulnerability. The lack of training can also be a vulnerability, right, for the human threats. Because the lack of knowledge, you cannot have practice without knowing what to do. So not having that knowledge can also be a vulnerability. So if we don't have simulation of drills, like fire drill, right? When the fire breaks out, people don't know what to do, and then we would have chaos and people would get hurt. So you would look at vulnerability from 3 areas, right? How we are logically considering to reduce the vulnerability, that's on the configuration side. Second, we want to look at the administrative side, how we would be able to control that through rules and also practices inside the operation. And then third, to really implement to make sure that we are fulfilling compliance and requirements, because reducing vulnerability is going to make sure that we are meeting the standards in the requirement for the regulation. Okay, so why do we care about risk management? If you reduce the risk level, I don't really think that a company can have 0 risk, right? In business, when they operate, they would always take risks. Every day that we live, we take risks, right? If you get in your car or you ride your bicycle or you take the bus, you take a risk because there's a chance there's a probability that something can happen to you between the time that you leave your house until the time that you arrive at school. So in the organization, when we're looking at risk, reducing the risk is only to a level of acceptance. That means that we can tolerate that risk so that way it is not negatively or have high impact on our operation or, ultimately costs. Okay. So when you look at the next section, it talks about different example of vulnerability and then risk management. So you would start risk management with identifying the risk. That means you have awareness of what type of risk, right? We talked a little bit about human risk. And then when you identify the vulnerability, it directly correlates with the type of risk that you have. So if I don't have updates, right, the risk, the chance that I can get attacked or malware can be either medium or high, right? It also depends on the type of updates that is for security. There are some things that are inherent. That means that it exists before the control can be placed in. And then you would have residual risk. This sounds very much like business, but a lot of the IT operation is business. So how can you control your risk? You really need to make sure that you have proper control. And for IT, everything that we looked at, we can configure, okay? A lot of the times, like when I work with an IT team, they say that, oh, we can't help it, but this happens. I said, no, because every time that if you are aware of that risk, you can control that risk, okay? Because everything that we do, it is configurable, right? Whether we might not have the appliance to do that, but we have to find alternate way to reduce that risk. So your goal is to make sure that it is almost mitigated. That means a lot of the times you cannot remove the risk, but you can accept the risk, okay? So here are the 4 things that you would see in risk response. This is very important for security certification, whether you're going for Security Plus, right, CISSP, or any of the security certification, it always comes back to risk management. You can avoid the risk. You see it, but you just ignore it. You don't want to deal with it. You just let it be, right? And so, for example, I work with a doctor. Every year we talk about HIPAA compliance, right? And this physician said, you know what? I'm not gonna fulfill HIPAA compliance 100% because I don't want to pay all that money, right? Digitizing all of these things, protecting all of these things, configuring wireless router, all the device access, using encryption, all of these elements that HIPAA require. And so the first year he's gonna have to pay $250 per record that is not HIPAA compliant. So if he has 1,000 patients, you do the math, right? After a while, so HIPAA would give them a certain amount of time to make sure that he fulfilled HIPAA. So he chose to avoid the risk, right? So I gave him a risk analysis. This is how much it would be to implement security solution. This is how much it would be if you don't implement security solutions. Second year, right? Increase in fees. And so over the time of the 5-year span, if you quantify that, you would see security implementation compared to the fees that he has to pay, right? So you can easily look at how that risk, if it's avoided, right? So not providing services that's participating in the risk activity, basically he just avoids the risk. And he's gonna have to pay money-wise, right? Now, if he chooses to transfer the risk, let's say that because I'm his consultant, he decides that he wants to implement all the solution, right? Now I am liable to make sure that his risk is controlled. So based on my contract, some of that risk is shared, or in the case that if he buys security insurance, right? If he's getting attacked or if there's data leaked or whatever, that risk is then partially transferred. You also have to take a look at the agreement and an MOU in the operation area. And then if you reduce the risk to where it would be accepted. So I told them, I said, the best way is you don't have to be 100% compliant. You can be partially compliant. You can say, okay, I can do this because this is the money that I have, but I'm not going to do this area, right? I won't have wireless segment on my network. I would just have everything wired and I would be able to protect that to reduce some of the costs. So we can mitigate some of it with some of the control, but digitizing everything and making sure patients' file are protected and then disposing paperwork properly, you know, that starts with training and then making sure technology is implemented. It is very expensive for a lot of businesses, and some of the older physicians, they own their business and they don't want to do that. And you see that with a lot of the business owner. So, you know, accepting the cost, right? We see some of that at the beginning. You have to make a decision on what level of acceptance do you want? Do you want to accept some of the risk or all of the risk, right? Either you pay $250,000 every year, or you can reduce some of that and then you pay $50,000 every year. So, you know, it's just very straightforward. So some of it, you would have to take a look at what they have, what kind of control they have, and what they want, right? I normally ask them, what do you need first, right? We have to look at what they need first, implement the control from the need, and then additional things that they want. Okay. So for A, it says, identify the appropriate risk management term for the following description. Senior management acknowledges the risk and must be addressed to that must be addressed to mitigate them. So as soon as you acknowledge or you identify the risk, that is risk awareness. The Chief Information Officer, the CIO, identifies the amount of risk that remains after managing and mitigating risk to an acceptable level. That's called a residual risk. A residual risk. Let me put 7 and 8 down on the next page for you. Sorry. ABC Corp has risks that exist before the controls are in place to manage the risk, inherent risk. So let's say that you have a small business and you've never had risk assessment before, right? They say that if you have a business and you don't assess your risks and you don't have a business plan, likely that the business will fail within the first 2-3 years. So we have to assess the risk, but before that, we would have some inherent risk, right? That could be internal or it could be some from external. And then D, risks that exist if in-place controls do not adequately manage risk. That will be control risk. So you have to control the risk in order to make sure that it is acceptable or tolerable. And that's what a risk appetite is to see how much you can tolerate. Some companies choose to ignore the risk or avoid the risk and then pay the money. For example, you guys hear a lot about TikTok being, there's concern about data security for TikTok, right? Because some of the data is housed internationally. There's regulation, they were trying to pass a law to prevent us from using TikTok. So coming from a perspective of a technology company like social media, like TikTok, they have to really take a look at the security implementation, how much that would be, right? It existed now to be able to manage all of that data security compared to if they just ignore it and just deal with it and then lose users in the long run, and then there's regulation consequences, right? All of these entities that's coming at them. So if you're looking at something like Facebook, they have faced some repercussions on security, on how they didn't protect some of the privacy of the user. And then, you know, that became a legal issues, and then they ended up paying a lot of money for it. Facebook made a decision to pay for it, and they didn't fix it before. So now it's mandated, so because they operate in United States, right, they have to fulfill the requirement here. So they came back and they fixed some of the problem. But Meta as a company choose to whether that risk is tolerable or not, right? So sometimes that could be millions of dollars, and sometimes it could be smaller or less, right? So for 9, when an organization cannot afford to implement the control of the risk, what type of response should the organization practice? Accept the risk. So if they cannot implement security solutions, let's say they don't have the people to manage that, or the money to pay for the service or technology, they would have to accept it. So I want to do number 10 with you to kind of give you an idea of how you would approach assessing assets in the organization. So you would start out with all your inventory, right? If you have 1,000 systems like PCs, desktop PC or laptop or handheld devices, you would list them, okay? So when we do audit, we look at the inventory list. And the way that you list it is you would list the system by its system name, right? Like how you would come up, you would see like, you know how some kind of have a default name like desktop and a number. But in a company, they would schematically give it. And then let's say that you have 100 servers and switches, routers, appliances, those are all your assets. Right, from a business side, after we had inventory every year, we update it and there's depreciation value. So let's say that I buy a system at $7,000 out of the box. That's how much it costs at the beginning. That's from the capital, right? And then after a few years, there's depreciation value in that system. So you would start with an inventory list, period. Okay, and a lot of this is the IT technician work, right? They would update. So when you install a system, you add it to the list. You install another system, you add it to a list. You install 100 computers, you add those to the list. Now, how is that important? Because when you see physical theft, like when people lose their laptop for work, right? That gets updated in the inventory. They have to have a replacement. That's an additional cost. So you would go through and you would assess the value of your equipment and your system. So let's say that you rent your own assets. Let's start with the car. Let's assume that our car is $20,000. If you own a home, that's $230,000. You put that down. If you have a laptop, so all of your property, right? The things that you own, you list those. Same thing with the company. Okay, you have 1,000 computer, you list those. You have, you know, security appliance, you list them. Then you have the people, right? You have employees and you have executives. You list those people and then their salary range. And also their worth is not just their salary, but the contribution to your operations. Okay, work-based value. And then if company have cash flow, that's liquid assets. A lot of e-commerce based or even retail companies have a lot of cash flows, right? People purchase things in class, that's revenue that comes in as cash. Let's say that you own a business, right? Your client pays you with Venmo or Zelle, that's cash flow, right? It's taxable, but it's still cash flow. So at home, it's the same thing. We would have your liquid assets. So let's say that you have $10,000 in the bank or in your pocket. That's your cash. Okay. So that's how you would put down the values. Now the value can change, right? Homes can change. You can improve your home. It will increase in value. It also can decrease in value because it's been used. So your system, its lifetime is approximately 5 years with regular use, so there's depreciation in that. Okay. So what type of risk assessment is usually performed by the employees? It will be risk control, self-assessment. How I can manage risk as an employee. Right, you guys, I'm pretty sure most of you have worked or seen people who have trainings before they start working, right? When you first get hired, they make you go through a lot of like safety type of training. That just means that it's for risk control, right? Do not carry 50 pounds or more without having a second person to help you, right? Team help. And then sometimes you have to wear certain attire, shoes like anti-slip. That's for risk management, right? So a lot of times for the employee, they need to do self-evaluation of risk control. And some of it is also post-training, right? When you go through training with the employee and they can also do the risk. Okay, so before we do this number 12, I'm going to flip it back to the notes real quick, and I want to go over the formula with you. Okay. We need to know how to do this for Security Plus and security certifications. They're going to ask you about this continuously, especially if you're doing like CISA or, audit, risk audit type of certification, you need to know this. Okay. So when we quantify the risk, you need to really look at the amount of money that item is worth or that asset is worth, right? We touch on that with the inventory. Sometimes that can also be points or numerical value. So for example, single loss expectancy, this is known as SLE. It's a cost of a single loss. So if my laptop is worth $1,500 and I went to the coffee shop and I forgot it there, I just lose how much? $1,500, right? But in a company, it might not just be one person that lost a laptop. It might be five people in a year. So you take 5, you multiply it by 1,500, and you get that amount for annual loss expectancy, 5 per year, right? But a single loss is one loss for that particular event. Now, that can also be quantified in data. So for example, if you have a data breach, 1,000 record was leaked or was breached, okay? Each of that record is worth, let's say, $200, okay? So in that one loss, you have 1,000 multiplied by the 200, that gives you $200,000 in that one single loss, okay? So an incident in security, they always quantify it to how much money did we lose, right? How can we make it back? So in a year, we look at the rate of occurrence. How often is that happening for that loss, right? So if you're looking at stores, if they have a lot of like theft throughout the year, let's say that they have 50 type of theft events, and each time it would be between $10 to $100, then they would look at the rate of occurrence is 50 times a year, right? Okay, and then we would want to quantify how much loss is that in 1 year by doing SLE times ALE or ARO. Okay, so let's do this together. So if they bought 100 laptops for the marketing team, the value of the laptop is $1,500. The employee loses about 6 laptops a year. How much do they lose in the whole year? Annual loss expectancy. So your SLE is $1,500. That's the price of a laptop, one laptop. But your ARO, the annual rate of occurrence, is 6 times because there's 6 loss in a year, right? There are 6 occurrences that happen in a year for that company. That's kind of high. So we would take, to calculate the annual loss expectancy, ALE, we would take 1,500 times 6. That gives us $9,000 in a year that they lost. It's easy math, right? So they're expected to lose $9,000 each year on the laptop. So for the business manager and the IT manager, when they sit down to do this, they will look at things like solutions to prevent loss, right? And if that solution is cost less than $9,000, it makes more sense to buy that solution to reduce that loss, right? So let's say that I can buy a solution to prevent, I don't know, sometimes they buy locks and things to make people, but there are technical solutions that you can implement, like a tracker solution. You guys seen that? Just like your phone, when you lose it, you can contact the company and they can track where it is. So like a tracker solution, maybe that costs $5,000 a year for all our 100 laptops. That makes more sense because then I would wait out 5,000 versus 9,000. So I might be able to recover some of the laptops with the tracker solutions. It also depends on how effective that is, right? So for final exam, I would expect you to know how to calculate this. You will be given a similar questions, and then you would need to calculate it. Okay. Okay. So how do I approach risk assessment? First, we talked about acknowledging the risk with really looking at what kind of things you have in existence, identifying your assets, inventory list, and the related risk. So if we have laptops, right, lost, stolen, people can forget it in different places. So those are some of the things that could happen to those systems. So identifying assets and related risk. Then based on that, we will look at the level of risk for that asset. Is it low, medium, or high? Right? Not critical, critical, or highly critical. You can also use numerical level, right? 1 to 5. And you can rank them. Then once you already assess the level, you would provide control recommendation. From a technical perspective, right, or even administrative perspective, we always would implement layered control recommendations. Okay. And then we would list the type of actions or activities that need to be taken based on a timeline in the documentation. So when you submit your risk assessment, you would list your assets, their related risks, the levels, and then how to control the risk, and within a certain amount of time, right? Because you want to see that reduce. So we want to make sure that we take initiative and implement it in a timeline. And you can do it in phases. You don't have to do it all at once. So if you're doing a risk analysis, like number 14, it says, Gabriella is conducting a risk analysis for the organization. What type of risk analysis report should she compile? So you can first use what's called risk registers. And you can use matrix. Think of it like a table, right? So matrix, you would list the risk, and then you would have like different level. You would fill in low, medium, or high. And then you would have the correlation for impact at the top. So for example, if we're looking at like outdated software or like an application that we have, we would take a look at, what kind of application that is, how it's impacting our server or our user system, and then you would rank it based on that. So you would use the risk register and matrix, and they have template for this already. Or you can also map it, use heat map. Any question? Okay, so risk register, that's defined here. So all your identified risk. So in that, you would have category specific risk, the likelihood of occurrences, the impact, your risk score, security control. You can also go to NIST and NIST. They have template and documentation that you can refer to. I think I put a couple of links above your notes for this week. And then when you put it together, it might look something like this. So everything that's closer to here's the unacceptable. So anything above this line is not acceptable. That's too high, right? Anything below this is going to be acceptable. So you would have to do the correlation. And then heat map is just a color-coded list. They have software tools now that you can use with some of the management applications. I had to take, this is one of my area for my dissertation, not my dissertation, my comprehensive exam. I had to take an advanced risk management class for my doctorate. Yeah. So if you a lot of the times you see this is the area of chief information officer or chief technology officer or IT manager. They operate in this, but if you are like analyst level 2, they would refer to you to be able to derive some of the foundational information or data for them to be able to make the decision. So, but in IT management and security management, we're trained to put this together. Any question? Okay, so supply chain. This is a very much needed area, right? So supply chain just means that all the elements that are required to produce and sell the product. Okay. So the example that I put down here is, let's say that we think about a coffee shop, something not like Starbucks. Starbucks is like a beverage store, right? A coffee shop. What kind of supplies do they need? So when you're looking at a business, you identify the type of supplies: coffee beans, milk products, sugar, cups, straws, cup holder, utensils, machine to roast, grinder, brewer system, refrigeration, storage, store space, right? Like inventory for dry goods and also, paper goods, workers, electricity, water, and so on. You just list all the things that are needed for operation to sell coffee to the customer. Now, when we come back, we have to take a look at coffee beans, where it's sourced, how it's received, when it's sent. So it is an entire chain to be able to get the product to the store and then the customer, right? The customer might buy a bag of coffee beans or they might buy a cup of coffee. So you have to look at their supplier for coffee beans, supplier for milk products, supplier for sugar, cups, cup holders, straws, spoons, you name it. Machines, the maintenance and support for those machines. And then the people who supply the metal and all the motors and all of the things for the machines. So it is an entire chain of all the products that is needed for an operation. Post-COVID, there was a concern and I'm sure during COVID you heard about toilet paper being, right, very much needed because people were worried about not having enough toilet paper. During COVID and post-COVID, there was concern because the paper pulp that was used to produce toilet paper were not enough. So when you're looking at supply chain, the company that produced the paper pulp to produce toilet paper, they were having issues with transporting those from India and everywhere in the world to the companies that would make toilet paper. And normally the larger corporation, they source it from that one or very few particular company that produce paper pulp. So it becomes a problem because from a cybersecurity perspective, if I want to cut a company, I go to the source that provides the product for that company, right? So if I want the people of the world not to have toilet paper, what do? I attack the company that produces pulp for paper for toilet paper. So this is why there's a high discussion about supply chain, because now they're looking at their target a little bit different. We're not just attacking the corporations that's on the outside. That's what you see from a consumer perspective. But if you're looking at like steel company, wood company, companies that really produce the things that we use every day, and utility company, those are the sources that where the cybersecurity protection is much needed. Because without that, it would reduce, right, the chain in how it would get to the consumer. Okay, so, and the areas for supply chain is a lot of it is automated because it's in the manufacturing, it's in some areas, robotic warehouses. You would see some of this. So transitioning to that, it is a huge attack vector that can cause business interruption and depletion in delaying supply for goods and services. So if you're looking at milk and milk products, how important that is, right? Not just for food, but you would see that dairy or milk products is needed for babies, right? For healthcare, for some of the things that we sometimes overlook. So by delaying the supply for it, that can cause a lot of issues on how these goods can get to towns and homes. So when you work with supply chain, you have to think about automation and autonomous system, right? Manufacturing plants, also be farming. Some of that is, you see a lot of smart farming now. A lot of the things that they built in sensors to really take a look at when the fruits are ripe or when they should harvest. There are, just not for watering system. I have a friend that owns a satellite, and he sells data to farmers based on, images of the earth. It uses like color-coded images to show like where is water needed. So farming community, they buy that just to take a look at how they would source water for their crops. Some part of the farm might need more water than other parts because for dry season. Hello. So some of that data can be critical for farming, right? And when it falls into the wrong hand, then that can also create issues. Okay, so when we look at vulnerabilities, what do we use? Okay, so when you assess vulnerability, you need to evaluate. You can scan and get your results and list the vulnerabilities, but you need to take a look at your existing rules or policies, because overriding the policies or changing the logs, that will probably be an attacker area to modify your security. Okay. So view your policies and your logs. That could be application logs, system logs, security logs, event logs. You should also talk to people, because vulnerability just doesn't lie within the machine, but it could also be human. And then testing your system. This is pen testing. Okay. So as you can see, we can only fix what we can find. A lot of the things that we can find, we would then try to control. But if you don't find it, then you cannot fix. Any question? Okay, so I try to incorporate some kind of element that you can see some information. So if you go to CISA.gov, let me see if they all. See if they change. Sometimes they change their website. Check 2024. So they have a checklist. Let me see. So here you can find guidance for small businesses. Let me see if they have some threads information. Yeah, there's some ransomware information, some resources, publications. Exploit remote, brief description of the impact. Let me see if it can help you find. So there's some stuff here on Oracle releases, but if you click right here where it says view all alerts and advisories, you will find a lot of different alerts. So when you land on the page, scroll down on the right sections after all the news release for the critical patches for Oracle, that's one of the alert. But if you click right here, it's going to take you to the cybersecurity advisories and alerts. Like Cisco Integrated Management Controller release information, ultrasonic vision legacy. So Oracle is one of them. There's Akira ransomware. So if you like that, you can click on that. So my intention is to give you a resource where you can refer to via the web. And this is a decent resource, right? It's going to give you some information. And so when you're looking at supply chain like Rockwell Automation, that will be part of that. So there are a lot more to just the computer. You would see that there would be a lot of automated systems or even organizational type of applications. So let's try. And then they would put down the date and the categorical number for the alert. Even your TV transmitter and things. It's really interesting. So let's look at ransomware. So let's say that if you select this, you would look at, so it tells you here that this is a critical area, right? It is a known exploited vulnerability. It enable multi-factor authentication for all services extent possible, particular webmail VPN and accounts in critical systems. So they give you a little bit of information here. It is impacted in a wide range of business and critical infrastructure, North America, Europe, and Australia. And it's in the current month. It is a threat actors with Linux variant targeting VMware EXI. And they already claimed $42 million for ransom proceeds. So there's some technical detail here. So Mitre actually documented that as well. And then you can see so common vulnerability, right? That would be listed there. You don't have to use this one, you can use others. So as you go down, you can answer the questions. What type of vulnerabilities is noted? Is the vulnerability exploitable remotely? Sometimes it's not, right? A lot of the software, that's the intention. What is the level of impact and how can it be mitigated or reduced? So for the mitigation, you should read down here. It tells you how you can, what is the level of impact and then the defense evasion. So as you know, ransomware loves to encrypt. That's the key, right? So, and after it encrypts, it's going to exfiltrate data. So it's going to send out data. They demand Bitcoin payment. So the encryption that they use, it locks the data. It is a hybrid encryption. It uses CIS27 stream cipher and RSA public key. So it is a PKI infrastructure with a stream cipher. And that's how they exfiltrate data, I believe. So here are some of the tools that it uses. So how do you know that you're compromised? You would see these type of files. anydesk.exe, win.exe, w.exe, some dynamic library file.
What would you find the answer to be? Is this vulnerability exploitable remotely?
Yes. When they exfiltrate data, it's always remote.
And so, does it say it on here?
Yeah, if you read through the article, it tells you that it does exfiltrate and it uses a lot of things that it encrypts things remotely. It doesn't say remotely directly, but when you exfiltrate data, that's a remote operation. Okay. So take the time to look through it. So this is a good source for you to go through and take a look at the alert. Mitre attack is also a good source for you to look at CVEs. That's what the industry community really put together for you so you can find the information that you need. And then they also have recommendation. They also have hash, file information, credential access, tactics and techniques. So here, down here, they talk about defense evasion, impaired defenses, disable and modify tools. So it disabled the antivirus or security software, so that's why it's going undetected right here. Remote access software is being used for that. Proxy is being used for that. Whenever you see streaming cipher, likely that they're exfiltrating data and they have to do that remotely. So here, mitigation aligns cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals, so using CPGs, developed by CISA and NIST, set medium of practice. So here they tell you how you can, if a company had gone through this is how they do to recover. They need to implement a recovery plan, and if they don't have one, they can go and find one and create one. And then require all accounts to make sure that they are following standards. So that means that they have to train their employee, change all the passwords, go through training, multi-factor authentication, but this also uses multi-factor authentication, so find alternate or implement better MFA. And then firmware updates, OS update, segment your network. This is used, you can use it with addressing, you can use it with, filter, firewall. There are different ways you can segment. So this long list of things, that's what you need to do to make sure that you can get back to where it was. And then some security controls are also listed down here, how to get started. So it's pretty thorough. It tells you on how to kind of navigate through post-attack or prepare for these things, right? It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's just when it's going to happen. So always have a recovery plan, incident response plan. Okay, let's address the last few. What type of tools are used in vulnerability assessment? So when you are a pen tester, you are going to look at your infrastructure. You need to determine what vulnerabilities you have in your systems, your servers, and your network. You would need things like password cracker to be able to get into some credential. You can also scan for credential, but and I think I mentioned to you guys before about brute forcing compared to, get the hash or rainbow attack. So some form of password cracker. You need to have a baseline analyzer that just gives you your system performance at the baseline or your network at the baseline. So that way you have an understanding of your system behavior and your network performance at the minimum. Then you would use network scanners like Wireshark, Nmap, or ZenMap. That's what we're going to use today. And then you can use TCP dump. There are many tools that are available that are free, and there's some proprietary. You can also use command like ARP or ARP. You can do ping, HPing. So we can use scanners that are gonna give us network information, system information. You can also scan for banners. So do banner grabbing. Ethical hacking class covers all of this area, right? And then once you can also use Nessus, which is a vulnerability scanner that is looking at your system configuration vulnerability. The lack of configuration becomes a flaw, right? So vulnerability scanner doesn't have to be Nessus, but it can be others. Nmap is a good one to use because it encompasses a lot of different things on the list. So we would start with that. So when you're doing pen testing, you need to make sure that you understand the rule of engagement, which is the boundary that are set for your pen testing. It's gonna entail your scope. So let's say that they only want you to test the DMZ area, right? Your public web server, some of the database, some of the mail exchange server, etc. That's gonna be your scope, and that's the rule of engagement. You, even if you're able to see more, go further, you don't. Right? Because we want to be ethical. Computer abuse law is highly effective, right? The people who are abusing that particular law would be 25 years or life in prison. And even if they parole, imagine your life without computer in 2024, 2025, right? It's really hard. So want to make sure that we follow the boundaries. What systems are assessed? So we need to make sure we identify the system that we are assessed. Even if you work within the company, okay, you're not contracted from the outside. Before you do something, make sure you ask for permission, even on public domain. It's funny because I sometimes go to Reddit and I want to read stuff like the tools that people use. I'm curious and I'm interested. And I see a lot of newcomers, they're using these tools that I teach in class, but they're scanning the public domain like YouTube, Google, Facebook, right? One scan, they might not make a big deal, but if you are attacking them, that's a legal consequence, right? Before you use active scan on anybody, you need to ask for permission, right? So make sure. So I see all the comments from the professional. Did you get permission to do this? So make sure we get permission. Written consent, specify that you are authorized to do it. If you are not authorized to do it, you are an attacker, an unauthorized attacker, okay? And that's a violation of Computer Abuse Act. Anytime that you circumvent a system or a network, it's 25 years to life in prison, right? And that act came about in 1984, and they have updated in 2020, 2000, and then 2020. So exploitation framework, what can we do with it? Metasploit is commonly used. This comes with Kali Linux. I just showed my ethical hacking class to set up Beef, right? So Beef allows someone to click on the link and then you take over their browser session, or you can take control over it, but setting it up and then enticing them to be able to click on it. So browser exploitation framework is one. You can use W3AF. This is you can find this available on GitHub, but you can also find it through other sources. So web application attack and audit framework, and there are more. So exploitation framework, each one, as you can see, it's intended for different things. A lot of the times we focus on browser and web application because mostly everything is on browser and web. So that's very popular. But Metasploit it encompasses a lot of variety of things. So if you want a one-stop shop, Metasploit might be ideal to start with, and then you can customize your tools based on what you need. So if you're interested in ethical hacking, right, you can get CEH. There's associate level now. I think it is a little cheaper than your regular CEH. The certification itself, now I heard that you can use notes, which it blows my mind, but it is a pricey certification. The associates, I think, is about same as pen testing. It's roughly 4 something. But if you go for the CEH, it's above, I think now it's like close to $1,300. You can get Pen Test Plus, which makes you a pen tester, but you have to know the criteria for pen testing and also some of the tools. And if you want to be using more Kali Linux, offensive security is the certification to get. It gives you, you know, capability to explore into purple team or even the red team side where you attack for a living. It sounds fun and interesting, and you guys know scans take a long time, right? Information footprinting, a lot of those things take a long time. So just like everything in security, you have to have patience. Okay. Any questions? Forensic especially. Okay, let me stop recording.